So I'm going to try to squeeze two talks into one period. The first talk, I'm going to say a little something about wallets and custody. Now, you probably think this is the most boring topic ever, but there are a lot of interesting side questions that show up. In particular, I'm going to be interested in some legal and philosophical implications of wallet design. I'm neither a lawyer nor a philosopher, so I'm mostly going to ask questions rather than to try to give answers. But I wanted to expose you to this because this shows some of the kind of unexpected things that blockchains will give you. So let me start with a riddle, which is, where do things like stock certificates, gold, cash, bearer bonds, things where physical possession matters. So, where do they live? Well, they live in bank vaults, deposit boxes. They have what are called custodians. So the custodians hold our kind of bearer bonds because we don't want people to steal them. So the idea is that the custodians have physical possession of things where physical possession implies ownership. So next question is, where do cryptocurrencies live? They live on the blockchain. That was a trick question. But nobody cares where the coins live. Where do the secret keys that control the coins live? That's the right question to ask. And there, they live in wallets. Now, that doesn't answer the question because I haven't told you what a wallet is. And it turns out that the notion of a wallet can be fairly complicated and not very well defined. And even if you think you know what it means, it's not entirely given that you do know what it means. But the purpose of wallets is to secure your assets from theft, meaning the keys. So the same way that if you buy stocks on Wall Street, in the old days, they would put them in crates, papers, and they would ship them to vaults in New Jersey across the river. And there are companies that exist only to keep stocks in vaults in New Jersey. The same way, there are companies that exist to keep your secret keys inaccessible to bad guys. But wallets, unlike vaults in New Jersey, have to interact with blockchains and exchanges. And this is where it gets interesting because this is usually viewed as a positive thing. Yes, my wallet will pull in currencies, merge them, keep track of things for me. And if I want to buy things, I press a button and my wallet will go out to Coinbase and buy something for me. And, it's a lot of convenience, but it also makes life complicated. So there are, several kinds of wallets. There's software wallets, something you might run on your laptop or a smartphone. There's hardware wallets, which tend to look like keys. And there's even paper wallets, where you can treat them in the same way you would treat bearer bonds and things like that. You could ship them to New Jersey and lock them up. So software wallets come in a number of forms. You can run things on your desktop. You can run it on your mobile phone. And they have a big advantage that they're very convenient. I can pull out my code in my phone and do trades, or I can sit in front of my laptop and do all kinds of complicated things. But of course, they're vulnerable to things like viruses and hacks and so on because they're connected to the internet. They're exposed to other software that might be downloaded. Everyone has heard stories about, if you click on a wrong link, then it will download something that scans your disk looking for something that looks like a Bitcoin address. And the literature is full of stories how mostly Chrome extensions seem to be a very popular way. So you download some Chrome extension that shows pictures of kittens in the corner, and really what it's doing is intercepting all of your currency transactions. And this is actually a thing. So you can say, well, that's not so good. Instead, we're going to go with hardware wallets. So a hardware wallet has the advantage that it kind of rattles around inside your pocket. It's air-gapped, meaning that it's not connected to the internet except when you want it to be. And so it's it seems like it should be more secure. You have to consent to plug it in, but that's also the kind of a problem, because you better make backups in case you forget to take the wallet out of your pants before you put it in the laundry, things like that. Now, in fact, they're not, there's also, many stories about ways to hack hardware wallets. Because it's probably true that while it's sitting in your pocket, nobody can get to it. But you have to plug it in at some point. And at the point you plug it in, then it's basically just as vulnerable as a software wallet. And so, it's, there's no kind of free solution to these kinds of things. There's paper wallets. So this is a picture of a paper wallet. This is the public key. This is the one you can share. This is the secret one that you had better not share. It's pretty secure because it's, sitting, under your bed or, it's, beg pardon?
Most digitally secure.
Digitally secure. Well, I'm a little skeptical even of this. It's not as convenient. I don't recommend this if you're red-green colorblind. You'd think they would have picked a better, better choice of colors, because if you scan the wrong side, then you lose.
Why he says it doesn't have the vulnerability of plugging in the stick.
Oh.
So the moment you take a picture, you're interacting with software.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. I was setting because I'm setting everyone up. And in fact, it turns out that there are an equal number of articles about how paper wallets, actually not the physical paper wallets, but the software you use to produce paper wallets, is just as insecure as the software that talks to your hardware dongle, as the software that runs on your laptop. So, everybody's out to get you. Is the thing you have. And you have to be, extremely careful. There's other different things. There's specialized wallets that keep track of only one kind of currency. There's other kinds of wallets that keep track of, I don't know if they're really universal, but they keep track of anything that satisfies certain standards, like ERC20 tokens and et cetera, et cetera. There's something called a full node wallet. If you really want to go heavy metal on the issue. You get a full node and use that as your wallet. That is bad for a couple of reasons. It's bad because it builds a copy of the entire blockchain. You need terabytes of information. You need lots of disk space. You have to run it all the time to keep up, so you've got electricity bills. This is not a mining rig. This is just a full node. It advertises your IP address. So everybody lurking out there on the internet knows that you're running a full node. The good part is that it's the most trustworthy data you can get, so that you're not going to be fooled by double spending attacks and so on, because you have the whole thing right there. If you're running a wallet on your phone, it's a simplified payment verification node, which means that it's possible that somebody spoofed you and gave you bad information. Not very likely, but possible.
Well, it's maybe a full node. I'm pretty sure that it's not the smallest full node that you can make, because I'm running a full node on my laptop and I just need 200 gigabytes of space and a decent.
This is rhetorical exaggeration, but still, it's an expensive way to do a wallet. But this is kind of the extreme in wallet design. This is the Cadillac of wallet.
I mean, more or less, basically, all consumer laptops, medium range and higher, can maintain different blockchains, no problem.
Even with all the disk space and
200 gigabytes.
yeah.
And you run a private, like that's if you want to store the whole blockchain. Most of the time, you just prune it into numbers.
Yeah. But I wanted to go through all the way from paper wallets to full node, to water cooled full node wallets.
I think connectivity remains the valid point.
Yeah. That something that you hear a lot about. I just want to explain it so that you know, doing my duty as a teacher. Every now and then you hear about hierarchical deterministic wallets, which are a very important thing. And the problem with old school wallets is every now and then you need to generate a bunch of new private keys and addresses, saying I've run out of private keys and addresses. Using the same addresses all the time is unsanitary. But as soon as I do this, I need to back them up. Because if I generate an address and I lose it, then I'm in trouble. But doing all this backups is kind of a pain. So hierarchical deterministic wallet is you generate a multi-word mnemonic. It's something that's called a brain key, where you, at least in an idealized form, you think of a phrase and memorize that. You generate a master key pair from the mnemonic, and you guard that mnemonic and the master key, as if they were the nuclear codes, because that's going to control absolutely everything. Now, in practice, you don't get to take sentences out of a James Joyce and use those. They'll generate nonsensical phrases for you. But if you express it this way, it's more fun. And so you take the mnemonic, you generate your master private key, and then from that you can generate a sequence of public and private key pairs. But the idea is that once you have this, all of this can be generated algorithmically. So you don't need to do backups all the time, because anytime you flush your wallet down the toilet and you need to generate new keys, all you need to do is start out with your mnemonic.
But you need to have a counter where you stop generating keys?
Yeah, I think you have to remember kind of where you stopped and how far you went and so on.
To remember that it's all on the blockchain.
Yeah. Actually, that's the point, because everything is out there, and all you need to do is find the decryption keys, and you can probably keep trying them until you finish. And this is pretty much any wallet you get now will probably do that, because it's more secure. Of course, I suppose if you get kidnapped by bad people, they know that you know the mnemonic, and so I suppose that's one a point of failure. So you can even organize things hierarchically. So that's the deterministic part. The hierarchical part is that you can kind of nest this. And so, the boss can take a mnemonic and generate the master keys. And then the boss can give each department of the corporation its own master keys. And so now we have a hierarchy here for the tech part of the department, hierarchy for marketing. And the boss can see everything, which makes bosses happy. But if you're in this sub-organization, you can't see any of these keys. You can't generate any of these. So the boss can start out to regenerate anything down here because the algorithm is set. So the boss here can figure out what the keys are down in this part of the tree. But if you're down in the tree, you can't go up. Now there's some caveats where it is possible to get into trouble if you release if you can combine public and private keys in different ways. I'm not going to get into that. But it's not entirely this simple. There are ways you can mess this up. But this is the basic idea. So that's that's what I wanted to say about hierarchical deterministic wallets. There's a philosophical question that I wanted to raise, which is the notion of custody. So custody is a legal term in the United States. It's defined and regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And there are technical definitions that are very hard to read, but there are also a sequence of examples that are offered as guidelines to what is and is not custody. So informally, you have custody of your customer's assets if you can steal it or abuse it. If you can't, then you don't have custody. If you can, then you do have custody. Now, these are laws that were written in the 1930s in response to the Great Depression. They mostly haven't been changed since then. But interesting things happen when you try to reinterpret these ideas in the context of blockchains. Now, also importantly, if you have custody, you're regulated. So if you are building a wallet and you are building a custodial wallet where you control your customers' accounts, then you have to be licensed, you have to get insurance, you have to do best practices. If you are doing a wallet where you don't have custody, then anybody can do anything they want. So this is a big deal if you're thinking of doing a wallet startup. Yes?
What about if I can steal the money, but I can prevent user from spending it indefinitely?
That would probably fall under abuse. So you would be a custodian in that case. But the definition is not completely straightforward.
In the beginning of the slide, you said that the difference between bearer assets and the assets on the blockchain. So here, the definition of custody: if you can steal it, you have custody. But what if you can fork the system of record? Does it mean you have custody?
I'm not a lawyer and I can't give legal advice, and so the answer is I'm not quite sure. I think it would be fun to think about that, but as I said, I'm raising these issues. I'm raising these issues because I'm actually advise a company that's worried about this sort of thing. I don't have much to say about it, but it's very interesting to listen to the conversations that people have. So custodial wallets have certain disadvantages. So the basic advantage is that because they can steal your wallet, they might. Now, if Bank of America tries to steal your wallet, then you're in pretty good shape because you can go and sue them, and you have some recourse. But if Mt. Gox steals your wallet, then you're out of luck. So it could be stolen by hackers, lost or stolen by the bankers. It could be confiscated by the government. So, the custodial wallets, the problem is that you have to trust the custodians. And organizations like the Securities and Exchange Commission and similar organizations in other countries exist precisely to protect consumers against thefts by custodians. As we know, no such organizations exist in the blockchain world. And so you're kind of on your own. Disadvantage of non-custodial wallets is that people lose their keys all the time. I witnessed an interesting discussion by some Facebook people about what happens if you forget your Facebook password. And it turns out the numbers of people who forget their Facebook password could fill a middle-sized European country. And there are something like 27 different ways you can recover, including appointing 3 of your friends, any 2 of whom can vouch that you're you. There's something where they show pictures of your friends on the screen, and you click on which ones are actually your friends. That never works because I have too many friends, and I don't know what a lot of them look like. So, advantages, disadvantages. Now, there's a danger here because you could say, well, I'm going to avoid all this. I'm going to give you what they euphemistically call a self-custodial wallet. That says that the wallet providing company, am not going to be able to steal your funds. It's your responsibility. I'll make it easy for you as I can, but I don't want to be a custodian. On the other hand, to be usable, you need to provide key management software. You need to do all this other stuff. And it turns out it's really remarkably easy to become a legal custodian even if you don't think you are, and even if you have no interest in being a custodian. And so the tricky thing here is, how can you make a wallet that's easy to use, relatively secure against the stupidity of your users, and not be a custodian?
Question?
Yeah.
Why should the world population at large be worried by being regulated by the U.S. institution?
If you're a U.S. corporation.
That's sure, but if I'm not a U.S. citizen, not a U.S. corporation, and
But I think if you sell your wallet in the United States and you violate this, you can't. It's like know your customer and so on.
But if I just upload some code and some American downloads it, then I'm responsible?
You're responsible. You could be like one of these people who gets arrested changing planes in Cyprus. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but you couldn't do business in the United States, and you might be in jeopardy if somebody argues that what you're doing is actual fraud, or something. Then the newspapers are full of people who are not U.S. citizens, but who do get arrested in Canada or Cyprus or someplace, usually in airports. So if you want to do this, stay away from airports. Is my take direct flights only. Yeah.
Yeah, the United States has jurisdiction, surprising amount of jurisdiction in other countries as well. The way economic and government policy-wise. So if you break U.S. law in another country, you're liable. So it's just what the United States does. It's how it is.
It's the way we roll.
Yeah.
Yeah. But basically, if you don't want to be a custodian, you want to make sure you are really not deemed to be a custodian by nasty people who have guns and things like that. So an advisor has custody, and this is actually a quote, has possession of client funds or securities, and funds and securities, I think cryptocurrencies and ICO tokens and so on count, even briefly, even in transient way, and this is interesting in a network world, if the advisor has the power to misuse, is also open to, denial of service is probably misuse. There are some exceptions. Inadvertent possession is okay if returned in 3 business days. So that means if I accidentally, leave a check on my stockbroker's desk, the stockbroker has 3 days to mail it back to me. Again, you can see that this is written in the 1930s. Not 3 days, but 3 business days. And again, I'm interpreting this very loosely. If you can steal or misuse it, then you have custody. So they give examples to try to illuminate what all of this means. So if an advisor holds a check drawn by a client, payable to a third party, do you think that's custody or not? No, it's not custody because you can't cash it. So anything that is analogous to holding a check drawn by a client payable to a third party is not considered custody. This is an explicit rule. So, try to imagine what are the blockchain equivalents of that.
So locking some funds wouldn't be custody in this scenario. If I have, let's say, I don't have custody, I don't control, I cannot misuse and pay and steal the money, but that this can block the money, as I said before. This is not custody according to this example.
Well, I'm not sure because, if I hold the check and I tear it up, then the client can write another check. But if I put your funds in escrow and then walk away from it, that's not, arguably, if I were a lawyer, I would say that these are different cases for that reason. Okay, so I talked about atomic swaps. So what's the custodial nature of atomic swaps? So in the stock market, if you want to do a swap, then the people doing the swaps are pretty much custodians because, we walk into a room, I give you a piece of paper, you give me another piece of paper. I could, instead of walking into the room, I could take that paper and get on a plane and go to Brazil. So that's custody because I could steal things. But in the kind of hash-locked, hash time lock contract thing that I showed you, you can't really do that. So this is like exchanging 2 checks, each addressed to a third party. And so arguably, that's not actually a custody. So if you're doing atomic swaps or some kind of atomic transactions, then arguably you could say you're free of legal jeopardy because at no point could anybody steal anything, because that's sort of the point of designing these atomic swap protocols. Yeah?
But then you may claim that transaction from Alice to Bob is also not a custody. Not a custodial.
Yeah, well, it's not clear who would be the custodian. So it's, if Alice gives Bob some money, it's only the intermediate third parties that can be custodians. So, if you put something in escrow at a third, Coinbase is a custodian, for example, because in principle they could steal stuff. Mt. Gox is certainly a custodian.
Is this interpretation, is it your interpretation that it's not?
No.
Because comparing it to so the question is Lightning node, money transmitter, and
That's a very good question, and I think nobody knows the answer to that. And just because something sounds reasonable doesn't mean that that's how it's going to turn out. There are lots of those things. At one point, people were wondering whether the internet itself was a copyright violation, because you could be sending a copyright picture for one person who has a right to another one, but every intermediate node has a copy of this image that they have no right to. And so arguably they're violating copyright. That turned out, the law didn't end up that way, but it might have. Similar thing, a transaction forwarded from one node to another, if the intermediate can't abuse the funds, dropping messages is not considered abuse because you can retransmit. Yeah.
With all these things, you have the issue of synchrony. Like if I am on one end, I don't see the payment yet. Somebody is holding it on purpose, and I pay another payment. Here, it's a little more complicated because you have the chain. But I pay another payment, and then the person in the middle shows the payment that I promised to make. Like let's say it's checks. In that sense, the person in the middle made me pay twice. Does that change anything?
That might arguably be abuse. I mean, certainly time, we know that time is important because of the 3 business day model. So that's precedent that the 1930 Securities and Exchange Commission had some kind of semi-synchronous model in mind. And so I think it's a very kind of fine line. If you do it deliberately, certainly if you somehow profit from that, then you're abusing it. If it's an inadvertent mistake, then it's not entirely clear. If you don't profit from it, then you could say, well, you just have a bad protocol. Maybe it's not really an abuse. These are all very gray areas that nobody really knows what the answers are. But there's certainly entrepreneurs who would like to know what the answers are, so that they don't run into trouble. So arguably, if you're forwarding things, then you're not custodian. Public transactions, I can take a maximalist position and say that anything that I do on the blockchain is so public that I would never be able to get away with stealing things. So, if you ask me to post something on the blockchain, then I can post it, and if I, somehow abuse it, then there's a record, and I know I'm going to be caught. And so you could argue that makes custody impossible, because I don't have the opportunity to abuse it. If I try, I'll end up in jail, and you'll get your money back, and in the end, no abuse other than inconvenience happened. Now, I think that's probably going a little bit too far. But you could have fun arguing that in front of the Supreme Court someday. When does custody actually happen? So if an exchange guarantees that funds will be available within 15 minutes of being received, then transient ownership of something is not custody. So if you say funds will be available within 15 minutes of being received, which is a standard kind of thing you would get on Wall Street, given things like confirmation, ambiguity, and so on, it's not clear what that means. When is an asset actually received in this kind of world? So all of the standard statements, there's nothing in these 1930s examples that talks about confirmation time and how many blocks need to be built on top of something. If I tell you, you have 3 confirmations and then later it gets reversed, am I liable for having abused your trust? And so if you're writing some kind of exchange, then in order to avoid being accused of abusing custody, you need to be very clear about when the transfer of a custody happens. And again, this is kind of unexplored territory. You might think, well, we can, obviously something reasonable would work, but the reason we have lawyers is because reasonable things don't always make sense. Inadvertent funds. So if you have a contract address, you can't stop somebody from sending you money. Even if even in Ethereum, there are loopholes where even if you turn off your fallback function, some other contract can commit suicide and send money to your account, and then you have it. So if your customer either deliberately or inadvertently sends you money, then now you're a custodian of that money. So if you really don't like your lawyer, you send them a couple of Ether and then sue them for abuse of custody. And but in this case, the sender's address is known, and so the advisor, the investment advisor, simply has to return the funds within 3 business days. So you can imagine some kind of game where I keep sending money to an advisor I'm angry at, and if he goes on vacation and doesn't return it within 3 days, then I call the Securities and Exchange Commission.
It's not that you can avoid it. You can design your smart contract with the pool-based model, right?
No. I think that if an Ethereum contract commits suicide, it can send its balance to any other address.
No, I mean for the first point. You can design your system, your smart contract with the pool-based model. So not push, but pull.
Yeah, but no, I can still push money to your address, and you can't stop me from doing that.
I can make it non-payable or whatever.
I'm not sure that's a, arguably, if I send you money and you burn it, then you've abused custody, and now I really have you.
There was a lot of examples in Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash where people try to send Bitcoin, but they send it on the Bitcoin Cash network, and you have two different addresses. In this case, some exchanges said send them money back. Some said we're overwhelmed, we're not sending it back.
Well, no. If I send you money that you didn't ask for, that's tough. I made a mistake.
I'm saying people send to the exchanges instead of sending to the correct address. It's sent to a different
to a different one.
different chain.
If the address you send it to happens to be your investment advisor, then the custody laws kick in. If I send it to a random person, if I send you money, you're not my advisor, and so you're not a custodian no matter what happens.
Because that's the same private key. So if it's even if there's instead of sending Ether, I send to Ether like to Ethereum Classic. So it's the same address. They hold the same key, the private key. So it is their address. It's just not an advertised.
So if these were accounts that were owned by my advisor, then there would be an issue. So these are only things that happen when you have a advisor-advisee relationship to make you a custodian.
What's the difference between custodian and fiduciary responsibility?
Custodian actually, fiduciary responsibility means you have to act in your client's best interest. Custodian means there's something, a bar of gold or a crypto address that can be misused. So interestingly, it's okay to deduct unchained fees if you return this, but you can't, but not advisor fees because that's subject to abuse. There are all kinds of acute things that go on here. Second official example from the Securities and Exchange Commission, you have security if you have the authority to withdraw funds or securities from an account. So if I give you power of attorney, for example, I tell you my if I tell you my ATM password, then you're an advisor. And that means that, in particular, you have to be very careful about charging fees, because if you can charge fees, then you can abuse it. And the most abuse probably isn't that somebody cashes in some widow's stock; is that they charge her fees for doing things. Even indirect authority to obtain possession, so power of attorney, partner, and so on. So if you make your advisor a partner in your firm, then they're absolutely a custodian. An advisor is not a custodian if it never has access to the client's public keys, in the blockchain world. So if you advise me or assist me in doing something, like if my wallet can set up deals, but it never has custody of if it never has my private keys, then you're okay. if sharded keys, then what if I give key shards to a number of people? Is there a custodian? Is there a collection of notes that become custodians? So here we have sharded keys kept by distinct advisors. When I do an authorized trade, we combine them and make the trade. So I put funds in escrow controlled by a smart contract. Smart contract says something like this. Is there a custodian there? Well, the contract can't be a custodian because the contract's not a legal entity. So the custodian has to be a person. So is the author of the contract a custodian? If the author cannot control the funds after the fact, then the answer is no. If the contract author can reach out and change the contract, maybe there's an override switch if you discover a bug, then you're a custodian. So if you write one of these contracts that has kind of a function pointer that points to the latest version, where you could change it and conceivably abuse it, then now you're a custodian. If you're unable to change it, if it's truly immutable, then you're not a custodian because you can't abuse it after the fact.
In a jurisdiction where robots as personhood, so you talking about that, there was a case in Saudi Arabia where they gave the robot Sophia a personhood or citizenship. So there it will be something, a robot, a smart contract may be a custodian, right?
In that case, yeah. That's kind of unexplored territory. So so if the author can't control the funds, the contract has to be open source, because if you don't know what's in the contract, then you could abuse it in principle. Even if the contract is legit, if nobody knows what's in it, then you're a custodian. So yeah, the author is a custodian if the author can withdraw funds or change the code. You split the secret key into shards, so you need M out of N. Usual case if you have fewer, then implications for custody are, well, there's a legal notion of operational independence. So, if I split my key into 3 parts and I give them to sock puppets all controlled by the same villain, then that villain is custodian. If they're really independent, then there are no custodians. And so operational independence has to be a financial separation, no personal links. And the actual definition is fairly complicated. So if you give me a key and you give my brothers keys, then we are collectively custodians, because there's reason to believe we would collude. But if you give me a key, you give the Pope a key, and you give Santa Claus a key, then then there are no custodians. So shard holders are not custodian if there's no danger of collusion. If there is danger, then they are custodians. Okay. Nevertheless, there's an interest. In order to do something, though, you need to take those pieces and put them together. This is not a homomorphic encryption world. So when you assemble enough shards to execute the transaction, you're a custodian, at least temporarily. You could argue, well, because I'm doing this on public, I can't abuse it because I know I would be caught. So there's nothing to worry about. So I'm a custodian between the time I assemble the keys, because I could grab the funds and run, to the time that those shards are destroyed. Now, the important thing is to be legally free of being a custodian, I have to be able to prove that I've destroyed those shards. So this is something new. So in order to avoid having to buy zillions of dollars of insurance and take exams and have my character investigated, I need to be able to prove that I've destroyed the shards and I can't abuse them after the fact. And I'm not sure how to answer this question. How do you prove that you've destroyed the key shards after you've assembled them? Yeah.
What about multi-sig, which is more common in the space where you sign the transaction is prepared and then you sign it consecutively? One person holds the keys.
If no one person can abuse it, then you're okay. And once you have the multi-sig put together, if you can't abuse it, if you can only use it once, then you're safe. But if I have if I've somehow assembled a key that can be reused later on, then I'm a custodian until such time as I've gotten rid of that, until I can no longer abuse it.
Yeah, but you just have threshold of amount of signatures. No one person, you don't assemble a key. It's not like a HMU.
Oh yeah, in that case, I suspect you're probably okay. But you need to, there's a notion of a time here that kind of didn't exist before. So it's okay to be a custodian for a brief period. So transient being a custodian is okay because it's impractical to rule that out. But if it is something where you assemble shards, and this sort of thing did not exist in the 1930s, so the law doesn't know quite what to make of this. But you could be in a situation where I can only be a custodian, say, for 3 minutes before I need to take out a multi-million-dollar insurance policy. And so how do I show that I've discarded all the information that would keep me being a custodian? Nobody knows. But anyway, yeah.
In the case of blockchains, then, wouldn't, as you spoke about all the network attack issues, wouldn't basically internet service providers and basically anything on the network be considered a custodian?
Only if they can steal your things. So actually, in order to be a custodian, there has to be kind of a trust relationship. So if a burglar comes in and steals my diamonds, they're not a custodian. If my stockbroker comes in and steals my diamonds, they are a custodian.
But again, ISPs, different companies are trusted.
They're trusted, but I didn't hire them to help me. So from the point of view of the wallet company, you bought this wallet, and that means that if you buy the wallet's services and the wallet can steal your money, then they are custodians, and then they fall under regulation. If they're not custodial, then they're unregulated. And believe me, you really want to be unregulated in this case. So if you write if you write a shell script for somebody that actually gives you the opportunity to steal things, and they sort of agree to hire you to do this, then you are subject to these laws. So
So couldn't the same logic be applied to an operating system? So I bought this operating, and then it also helped me control my bitcoins.
Yeah, again, I'm not a lawyer, but that does sound like, if I bought this operating system to control my bitcoins, then it's a wallet.
And then again, then they are custodians.
Yeah. Then Tim Cook had better get a license from the SEC.
I have some kind of a meta question listening to all of this. I'm thinking of, this is all derived from the fact that the US has common law, and it seems very bizarre to me that there were some laws written in 1930s, and now we kind of trying to fit these absolutely new concepts into this like round peg and square hole, how the saying goes. And it seems very bizarre to me and kind of unresolvable, because these new notions of multisig, they didn't have multisig in 1930s. And do you see some truth in the opinion that maybe countries with civic law systems will have an advantage in this sphere because they can just write new laws with new
this is not common law. This is a regulation. So the Securities and Exchange Commission, there's a law that sets it up, and the Securities Exchange Commission is in charge of protecting consumers on the one hand and advancing commerce on the other hand.
Why the blind COVID test from 1930 something to tokens?
These are regulations from the 1930s. They could be changed tomorrow. For example, ICO tokens, are they securities or not securities?
Why even ask this question when we can, if we want to regulate it, why not write the law when we define token, we define cryptocurrency, and we
someday that will happen, but this is a very slow process. So the same way in what'll happen is eventually either the existing laws will be interpreted in a way that says that yes, ICO tokens are securities, utility tokens are a fraud and considered securities really, because everybody knows that's what they really are. And then they won't need any new regulations, or they'll come up with a regulation that says that existing regulations don't quite fit, we'll do something else. But Congress does not pass these things. These are done by bureaucrats. Congress can override the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's like the European Commission. It can be overridden by a regular government, but it's not, technically it's not a law.
Just kind of temporary measure. We're trying to apply all laws and all regulations.
Well, it's a temporary measure that will probably never go away, but yeah.
We have to apply the old laws until they are changed, their laws, until they are replaced by new laws.
But I think in this space, people were very surprised how thorough the SEC's report on the Dow was and Ethereum in general. I think a lot of us kind of think, they're old bureaucrats, they don't understand the system. But if you read the report and they know what's going on, they actually have like a very large team that's very up to date and understand the nuances of the system and why. So I don't see that as really interesting.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I think I'll move on to the next. So anyway, I'm going to make a few remarks to kind of wrap up some loose ends. I'm not going to give you sweeping visions of the future because we've already seen a lot of this. I'm going to express some opinions that will probably offend, at least I hope will offend people and wake them up. So, you've seen this paper before. I went back and reread it before I came here, and I was actually surprised by what I found because what this paper actually says wasn't what I thought it said. And I think it isn't what most people think it says. We can't read this paper like it's 2008. The way people read it in 2008 was different from the way we read it today. It's like a holy script. It has to be interpreted, not just read. And, like other kinds of founding documents, it turned out that the way we think of these things now is very different from the way people thought of this at the time. And I thought I'd sort of look at this. Okay, so what was the motivation for all of this? Well, it sounds weird to say this, but Nakamoto, and I'll call Nakamoto a he because that's it's a male name in Japanese. He says, well, commerce on the internet is exactly the same thing as credit cards. No more or no less. And credit cards are a big problem because credit card transactions are reversible. And oh my God, those poor merchants. All these annoying people who buy things and then reverse the charges. This is a huge injustice, and the internet will never really catch on if companies like Amazon have to use, oh my God, credit cards. Because everybody, the merchants will feel so insecure that they will never actually do anything. And so, in order to save commerce on the internet, we need to figure out a way to replace credit cards. Now, of course, this is only a problem from the merchant's point of view. A broader point of view might say, well, merchants probably think that chargebacks and reversals are annoying. On the other hand, it gives consumers confidence enough that they actually buy things. That if you could never reverse a transaction, you probably wouldn't ever go to Amazon. And there's a reason why it's easy to get your money back in most cases is because they want to increase consumer confidence. But none of this shows up. This is a very simple kind of one-dimensional point of view is chargebacks are bad because those poor merchants are being cheated by somebody, probably liberals. Any mediation, Visa, MasterCard, is a source of friction and inefficiency. The mediation involves things like fixing mistakes. I got charged twice when I bought something. Somebody in Kazakhstan bought $1,000 of furs on my credit card last year. All of these services that we provide are that financial services companies provide are viewed as strictly as rent-seeking, friction and inefficiency, not as protection. So they point out, well, merchants have to decide whom to trust. Customers' privacy is invaded, hence today's surveillance capitalism system. There's something to that. And so Bitcoin exists all and only as credit card replacement on the internet. It's the only use case that's explicitly discussed. I know that there are kind of secondary sacred sources where there are other discussions, but in this paper, it's all about credit cards on the internet. Irreversible charges are great because they protect the merchants. Consumers, well, he doesn't actually say this, but it's clear that the feeling is that consumers don't deserve protection. All the consumers ever try to do is figure out how to outwit honest merchants. So again, this is a very kind of one-sided point of view, and a lot of the kind of problems with Bitcoin come out of this. For example, there's no mention given of recourse for theft, fraud, anything like that. Because the only protection that we need are protections for merchants. Fraud, from the merchant's point of view, are chargebacks, that kind of thing. Consumers are kind of on their own. If you don't like things, hire your own private army or something. So what happens? Somebody characterized this as saying, well, okay, the sales pitch for cryptocurrency, for Bitcoin in particular, is would you be willing to give up your airline miles in return for never being able to dispute a transaction? So all of these, everybody hates Visa and MasterCard for obvious reasons, but, they do give you other services. You can argue that whether these are morally corrupt or whatever, but, there is some value there. And again, the whole vision here is one-sided protection for merchants and not for consumers on the internet. And if something goes wrong, if the internet isn't as secure as you think, well, that's your problem. The whole point is to eliminate all of the kind of protections that society provides in order to give kind of absolute power to one side of the transaction. This is kind of a cliche at this point. This was, controversial statement when it came out. As we know, money serves actually probably three purposes, but, money is supposed to be a medium of exchange, where you can buy things. It's a store of value. It's also a unit of accounting, but that's not quite as interesting. And as a store of value, as something you keep under your mattress, Bitcoin was a huge success until it wasn't. But 100% of, maybe not 100%, but the vast amount of interest in the public and the media and so on Bitcoin has to do with the fact that you can become rich for free without much effort on your part for a while. And of course, the medium of exchange part, is not been such a success. And this article that I was citing saying, well, actually, nobody uses it to buy beer or pizza. You use it, you're buying just another commodity, one that's more highly volatile than pretty much anything else. But what we forget is that Nakamoto's original vision of Bitcoin as a credit card replacement on the internet has been totally forgotten. Nobody talks about doing that. People talk about Bitcoin this, Bitcoin that, going to the moon, whatever, but there's nothing about the original vision. Conversely, Nakamoto never mentions, speculation, going to the moon, all of this stuff in the paper. And one has to wonder whether wherever he is, whether he's isn't horrified by how these things came out. So again, I can't. Maybe the real Nakamoto is in this room, for all I know. And if you are, then feel free to stand up and correct me. There's this is one of my favorite Bitcoin headlines ever. This looks like The Onion, but this is a real headline. And there's other lots of other stuff. So there was a time when people made a gallant effort to use Bitcoin as a sort of the way it was originally intended, as a way of buying things on the internet, but mostly because of volatility, it didn't work out well. The macroeconomics of Bitcoin and other coins are kind of fascinating. There's, Satoshi never comes out and says this, but there's this whole Austrian school of economics that says that inflation is unilaterally evil. It's also artificial. That if we didn't print more money, then inflation wouldn't exist. That inflation is actually a conspiracy by central banks to steal from people. And this is why they tend to like things like gold standard and so on. Gold standard hasn't worked. They stopped using the gold standard in the 1930s when it was really hard to get out of the Depression, and wasn't until I think the 60s or 70s that they finally got rid of the last bit of gold standard. But time never changes in this kind of view. And the thing is that it's immune to inflation. There's a number of passages where he says it's great because central banks can't inflate Bitcoin, but they never mention deflation. Problem with using with deflation, so deflation says the prices go down. We've all seen inflation, and deflation is actually relatively rare, but once you're in a deflationary spiral, it's really hard to get out. Because if my Bitcoin is going to be worth twice as much in next month, I'm not going to buy a car. I'm going to hang on to it for another month and buy 2 cars. As a result, no cars are sold. And this shows up in real life. It's happened in Japan in the 80s. There's this classic story. Krugman, this New York Times economist, tells this story of the babysitting cooperative that was set up by Washington civil servants, where everyone accumulated the coupons, and the coupons were worth an hour of child care. But then people started hoarding the coupons rather than engaging, because the value of the coupons was going to go up, and so no babies were sat as a result. And this drives libertarians crazy, because this is basically like the Great Depression. Yeah.
But why is this a problem? If the service was not provided, it means that people didn't want the service that much.
But these coupons existed to make the service easier.
So it turns out that people just didn't want it. So what?
Well, this is the classical bubble case where they really wanted the service, but they thought, if I postpone getting the service now, then I'll do it next week.
But at some point in time, they will want the service more than their coupons, and they will spend the coupons eventually.
I think, I think the kids grew up before that happened.
It's not that no baby seated, it's just people pay these dollars instead of coupons.
Yeah.
I want to say that at the time of the gold standard, the gold was the basis, there was no inflation. Inflation is created also by credit. Credit is minting money.
No, what you're saying is inflation is a real thing. Inflation is not just the amount of money. You need to expand the money supply to deal with inflation. I don't want to get into micro, macro economics here, but what I'm saying is that this point of view is very one-sided. So out of control inflation is obviously bad. Deflation is arguably worse. But this whole idea of saying, well, there's a fixed number of coins, and actually it's decreasing because people lose coins. So the actual supply of bitcoins is going down. The economy is you can buy more stuff on the internet than you could in 2008. And so what's happening is, at least until recently, your bitcoins were increasing in value. So why would you ever spend one? So as an investment, maybe that's what you want, but as a currency, it's not a currency. So deflationary spiral. There's all of these. These slides are about 6 months old. So this was when Bitcoin was on its way to the moon, and so these things have to be. Ransomware makers. If you go through the original paper and you replace merchants on the internet with ransomware makers on the internet, the paper still reads pretty much the same. Anyway, fees. At one point, fees were skyrocketing. That's no longer the case, but there's volatility even in fees, which makes it even harder to use this as a currency. There's an interesting paper which is kind of be characterized as Bitcoin at the end of time. So it says in the future, all the block rewards will be gone. So when you go out and mine vigorously and burn up a couple of icebergs, all you get are fees. This means I've been speaking for an hour, so I'm going to stop soon. In the future, all you get are fees and so then what happens is, think seagulls. If you've ever lived on the beach, you'll see that one seagull will grab a clam, and immediately happens all the other seagulls who are sitting around will immediately descend and steal that, not from the beach, but from the other seagull, because it's easier. And so what this says is that when there are only transaction fees, what you should do is if you see somebody produce a block with a whale transaction with a big fee, it can be more effective. Instead of building on top of it, you steal that transaction and build your own block to compete. And of course, you're likely to lose, but if the fee is big enough, then you're better off. So now nobody has an incentive to build on anyone else's blocks. So you want your transaction to get through, you put bigger and bigger fees. The bigger your fee, the higher the incentive the miners have to steal it and not build on one another's blocks. So who knows whether this will actually happen, but there you go. And this could mean that Bitcoin and similar things could get into this kind of spiral of.
This only happens in cases where the queue is empty. When you don't have enough transactions build up.
Yeah, or where there's a disparity. Yeah, if somebody makes one of these programming mistakes where they have a 10 cents and a 10-cent transaction and $1 million fee, then the seagulls will start swooping. This brings us to these are all issues that we're talking about. There's huge controversy about the block size. Everybody has different ideas how to fix it, and as Gun will tell you, this is a governance problem, not a technical problem. There are vested interests who don't like things, and so what's the theory of Bitcoin governance? How should Bitcoin be governed? Well, my favorite theory is, not the one I favor most, but the one that's most amusing, is called canonicalism, which is that all and only what Satoshi revealed is permitted. And people did argue, saying 1 megabyte, that's what's mentioned in the paper, and so that's like, why is Sabbath holy and not Tuesday? Well, because that's what the document says.
Small correction, 1 megabyte is not mentioned in the paper. It was introduced by Satoshi like in 2010 as a temporary measure against spam.
Okay.
So there is nothing more permanent than that.
I stand corrected, but it was still the, if not the original scripture, then the derivative scriptures. Kind of like, chicken and milk. But of course, that fails to, but Bitcoin has been changed a lot. And fundamentalists always insist that what they're doing it's always been this way, and it's usually always been that way since 1950 or so. So actual governance is much more complicated, and here we can dip into conspiracy theories. There's core Bitcoin devs, defined as people who can commit to Bitcoin D. Ultimately, they have a huge amount of control because they can commit stuff, and improve stuff and break stuff and so on. They're supported by this sinister Bitcoin Foundation, and a lot of the controversies have to are resolved by a not very transparent process. So I don't know about you, but I have trouble keeping track of all the different Bitcoin forks. I mean, this is worse than some Italian Marxist party where everybody splinters, and you've got Bitcoin, Marxist-Leninist, Bitcoin, Red Brigades, that kind of thing. But this is a sign that governance probably needs to be rethought, or maybe this is a good thing. Maybe the world just needs more cryptocurrencies. I don't know.
What is a hardcore and softcore? What's the difference?
It has to do with compatibilities, but that would be different to talk. Okay, so now I'm going to do my last transition and talk about particular things that I'm interested in. I just love to explain why Solidity is a really bad language, but the problem is that the badness goes all the way down to the VM. And if I were in charge of designing a VM, then money or currency would be a first-class EVM type. It's crazy to pretend that money are unsigned integers.
Solidity is the language.
Is a language that's used for smart contracts, but Solidity is the JavaScript-like language that I claim is designed to trap you into making mistakes, which is compiled to bytecode, which is run on the Ethereum virtual machine. And I claim that the rot starts at the virtual machine and goes up.
If you make a special money type, either in the EVM or Solidity, instead of representing money as you in, then ICOs are not possible because you can't print the tokens out of nothing.
Oh, there's some, when I mean you can't, when I assign a uint to another uint, then I have two copies of the data at least temporarily. That was the basis for the reentrancy attack. If I use, for example, some kind of Rust-like linear types, then the assignment is atomic, and the reentrancy attack wouldn't work because you wouldn't have duplicate money sitting around in any state.
Yeah, I agree that money should be a special data type, but it only should allow equality. Just like with pointer arithmetic is a bad thing. So in the safe language will not allow pointer arithmetic. In the same way, the safe VM or language shouldn't allow mass arithmetic. So you shouldn't be able to say, I have 1 billion tokens out of nowhere, or you shouldn't be unable to say, increment my amount money.
Yeah, you should be able to say merge them, but something like linear types, which guarantee that you always have an owner. Rust uses these for memory management, but you can also use it for money management. And also you want a guarantee that every unit always has an owner at every time. Again, you can merge units, you can transfer ownership, but you can't do sloppy arithmetic the way that people do things. And it's never created or destroyed except under circumstances when it's okay to create or destroy things, like when you start an ICO or start a new country or something like that. Tokens and non-native currency should be first-class EVM types. So one weird things about Ethereum is tokens, both fungible and non-fungible, and Ether are completely different methods. One, kind of the bearer, your Ether account sort of lives with each contract, but your ICO tokens live in a mapping somewhere on one contract. And the fact that tokens and currencies are treated inconsistently and differently is, there's no reason, that things should be that way. And so you should be able to define token types and ETH types. This is too important to leave, again, to JavaScript programmers, and ERC20 has some well-known race conditions and bugs. If you build it into the EVM and do it right, then you're not at the mercy of carelessly formulated standards. My very last slide. Things that I'm interested in are, as I talked about earlier, cross-chain ecosystem. So that there's all this distributed machinery that goes on the inside of a blockchain, but at the end you have something that looks like it's a single non-distributed thing, at least if you do it right. But if in the future there will be many, many blockchains, there will either be zero blockchains because the idea didn't work, or there will be many blockchains. If there are many blockchains, then we need another, like layer 2 or 2.5 system for doing atomic transactions across blockchains. All the distributed things that we do with regular data we'll want to do across blockchains. And there's a lot of interesting questions about what that means and what it should do. Formal verifications and proof are no longer a kind of academic luxury. If you stand to lose $50 million because your 10-line smart contract was buggy, then maybe you're willing to pay to have it formally verified. And again, this goes all the way down the EVM. You'd like to have a formally verified EVM. Non-currency applications, which include financial applications, I think are actually more interesting in the long term than currencies. Because I think there's a lot more, in some sense, the more boring the application, the more likely it is to change our lives. But the truth is, I'd be happy to know about any applications. This is still a kind of an awkward point. You notice that at the panel, everyone kind of danced around the issue that they didn't actually have any applications for a lot of the things that people were doing. In governance, as I mentioned, the revealed word of a Satoshi plus, a kind of a priesthood of developers is probably not a way to run a modern economy. Just saying. Okay, that's it.
You mentioned store of value and speculation as kind of synonyms, the way you presented this. And that's not really the way I understand it. I'm curious to hear, just take the Venezuelan case of just offshoring your money to a more stable place, and the volatility is just kind of an annoying side effect. That's not the point.
Well, the volatility makes it a worse store of value
Then what?
than a non-volatile store of value.
Well, yes, but it is a use case that was given. You can't say they were speculating. It's not the same thing.
But I think people when they buy Bitcoin, they buy it to speculate. You know, maybe not people in Venezuela who buy Bitcoin so that they can eat. But
I just want to make a distinction between a store of value because I buy gold. I don't think it's going to go up. I'm just afraid for some reason that somebody's going to steal my stuff, and it's considered stable. Whether it's true or not is another thing. And then I have speculation. I want to make money. They're really different motivations. The way I see it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would put them both in the same bin, but you're right. There are many subtleties there.
You said that the buyers don't have any protection, but there is a difference between credit cards where credit card is a pull system and this is a push system. So in a pull system, you give your credentials and you hope the merchant just takes the amount that he's supposed to, and Bitcoin not. You don't do that. You do have physical solutions for that, like chip and pin, where you get like the machine and you type, and you only give a cryptographic proof. Is there such a solution for credit cards on the internet, or something that actually gives this type of protection to buyers?
No, credit cards on the internet, you really do have to trust your provider ultimately. You know, chip and pin basically protects Visa. You know, because Visa says, at least my card does, that you're liable for the first $50, and after that, if you give them timely notice, then they'll cover everything else. You know, the truth is that, you know, a couple times I've had my card stolen or numbers leaked, and they cover the $50 too. You know, in return for this, they spy on you and have credit ratings and leak credit ratings and do all kinds of evil things, but they're still better than Mt. Gox in that sense. So, you know, you have to choose your poison in some sense. But, you know, it's not clear to me that when you do chip and pin and all this kind of password stuff, you're really protecting them just as much as you're protecting yourself. But yeah, I'm cynical.
That's actually a good point, because that kind of encourages exchanges to also protect themselves against, like decentralized exchange or non-custodial exchanges.
Yeah, well, exchanges and so on will probably be forced to look more like Visa and MasterCard, both by consumer demand and consumer protection regulation.
So, do you have an opinion that Satoshi didn't understood how credit card system works, and as you shown, it was only concerned with the well-being of merchants and not other consumers? And in my opinion, the problem with credit card that you can't opt out of credit cards. So sometimes I want cash-like functionality, and sometimes I want a protection that credit cards give me in exchange for 3%. Instead, somebody wrote like how you buy a sandwich. So you pay so many middlemen without even somebody asking your approval for paying them. So that would be a better system, and the only rational explanation for what Satoshi designed is that cash-like functionality foundation, and on top of it you can build a credit-like system, credit card-like system.
Oh, I absolutely agree. If I were an evil corporation that wanted to take over the world with a cryptocurrency system, what I would do is I would set up a Bitcoin-like coin run by a separate foundation, and then I would set up a financial services company which you could hire or not hire, and I'll say I'll give you charge reversals and in return for credit, in return for fraud detection. But you can do seamless, borderless transfers. You can do anything that isn't actually going to get me in jail. So I think there's a lot of possibility for setting up global, you know, for getting all of the classical benefits of cryptocurrency and providing opt-in consumer protection.
Yeah, and another thing that we say that Satoshi didn't mention speculation. He thought about speculation. It's implied by this limited supply curve. And from the beginning, a long time in this ecosystem, from the beginning, people were saying Bitcoin will be $1 million. So it was implied from the Satoshi white paper.
That this would happen. Yeah, no, That's a good point, but I think he didn't anticipate that would be the only thing that people do with it. So, at least now, maybe things will change. Okay, I don't want to keep people from lunch any further, so thank you all, and good luck.